Martin Graves sat alone in the dim basement office of his brownstone. The soft hum of servers filled the silence. On one of his monitors, a high-definition video played in a loop. His jaw tightened as he watched the screen. There was Julia, his wife of 8 years, laughing on a velvet armchair in a hotel suite that oozed wealth. Beside her was Adrian Cole, once Martin's closest friend. Adrian leaned close, pouring champagne, whispering into her ear. Even without sound, Martin could read the words on his lips, a new life. Martin's eyes didn't blink. Julia's wrist sparkled with a diamond bracelet he hadn't bought. She tilted her head back, laughing like a woman who believed she had already won. So this is it, Martin muttered to himself. 8 years of marriage, reduced to pixels. The betrayal wasn't only in their smiles. It was in the careful way she touched Adrian's arm. It was in the ease of their closeness. He clicked to another screen. A folder of decrypted files sat open, messages between Julia and Adrian. The words were cold, deliberate. Adrian had written, "The prenup won't matter if we can prove he used company resources for surveillance. Your mother's contacts will guarantee custody." Julia's reply had been worse. "The kids barely know him. He chose work over family years ago. We'll make sure they understand." Martin exhaled slowly. This wasn't an affair. This was an erasure. For years, Martin had been betrayed in business. Colleagues who sold confidential data, clients who twisted facts. But this was personal. Julia and Adrian weren't just unfaithful. They were rewriting his life. They wanted his children, his fortune, and even his name. "They don't know the game they're playing," he whispered, his tone calm but sharp. "Because I wrote the rules." His gaze shifted around the office. Upstairs, the brownstone gleamed with designer furniture Julia had chosen. Art from Paris, rugs from Italy. None of it reflected him. Not the foster boy who had built a business from nothing, who valued function over flash. Even the family portraits on the walls looked curated, staged moments arranged by Julia. "Was any of this real?" he asked the empty room. Martin switched off the monitor, plunging the room into silence. He pulled a heavy folder from his desk drawer, placing it carefully on the table. Inside were months of bank statements, property records, and investigative files. Long before he caught them on video, Martin had suspected. He trusted his instincts. And now, his suspicion had hardened into proof. On the first page, clipped neatly, was a glossy photo of Julia and Adrian smiling at a charity gala. To the world, they looked glamorous. To Martin, it was evidence. He let the weight of betrayal wash over him. The woman he thought he knew, the friend he trusted, the threat to his children. Then he buried the emotion. Emotions were for amateurs. Precision was his strength. Back in 2014, before the cracks, Martin had been a man learning civilian life. 12 years in military intelligence had left him sharp, methodical. He had traded covert missions for corporate security consulting. That was when Julia Clark came into his life, a dazzling real estate developer with ambition in her smile. Their connection was instant, reckless, and before a year passed, they were married. Friends had warned him. "She's too fast," one old army buddy had said. "People who rise that quick in high society are chasing something else." But Martin brushed it off. Julia had seen him, not just the soldier, but the man. When their twins, Ethan and Grace, were born, Martin believed he had finally built the family he never had. For a while, it looked perfect. Julia thrived on the lifestyle Martin's contract provided. Dinners at private clubs, invitations to exclusive events, recognition among peers. Martin didn't complain. His job was dangerous and unpredictable, but it paid well. While Julia attended galas, he worked late nights, reviewing data, tracking threats, protecting clients. "It's fine," he used to tell himself. "She's building her world, and I'm protecting ours." But deep down, he never noticed how that gap kept widening. The first cracks in their marriage didn't come with shouting or slamming doors. They came quietly, like shadows in the night. Julia began answering late-night calls in hushed tones, stepping outside when Martin walked into the room. Business trips multiplied, and the explanations grew thinner. At first, Martin ignored it. He wanted to believe the woman who had once held his hand in the hospital when Ethan was born prematurely was still there. By 2019, the shift was undeniable. Julia's charm became sharper, almost rehearsed. She spent more time with investors and developers Martin didn't know. When he asked, she brushed him off. "You wouldn't understand, Martin. This is business." He would nod, tired from another overnight mission for a client, but the words stung. Business had become her shield, and with each passing month, she grew colder toward him. Martin tried to fight for their family the only way he knew, through consistency. He coached Ethan's little league games, read bedtime stories to Grace even when his eyes burned with exhaustion, and insisted on family dinners whenever he could. But Julia's eyes always drifted to her phone. "Can you put that down for one night?" Martin asked gently once. Julia sighed. "You're always away. This is my work. Don't make me feel guilty for doing what you don't." One evening, Martin sat at a bar with his old army buddy, Caleb. "You know what's funny?" Martin said, swirling his glass. "I could track a hostile 2 miles out in the desert, but I can't figure out what's happening in my own home." Caleb gave him a long look. "Sometimes, brother, the threats aren't out there. They're sitting right across your dinner table." The real turning point came on a quiet Sunday morning. Martin sat at his desk, scanning public records. Years in intelligence had taught him one thing: patterns don't lie. Julia's growing aggression, her family's interference, her smug confidence, they all fit a pattern. And Martin was ready to uncover it. The breakthrough came in sealed court documents, obtained through a favor from an old contact. As Martin scrolled through the scanned files, his eyes narrowed. Julia's mother, Judge Margaret Harrison, had dismissed a drunk driving case years earlier. The record said insufficient evidence. But the sealed version told the truth. Her nephew had killed a family of 4. Margaret buried the evidence. Martin leaned back, staring at the monitor. "So this is the foundation," he muttered. Julia's hunger for power wasn't born in a vacuum. She had grown up idolizing her mother's influence, and now that influence was a loaded weapon. With the right timing, Martin could aim it where it hurt. For the next 2 weeks, Martin built his case like a soldier laying traps. He collected financial records, photographs, campaign donations tied to Julia's father, Gregory. Every detail was cross-referenced and verified. "If I move, it has to be bulletproof," he told himself. This wasn't anger. This was preparation. By the time he was finished, Martin had enough to destroy the Harrison family. But he wasn't reckless. He didn't want to humiliate Julia yet. He wanted leverage. He wanted control. So he waited, letting Julia make her move first. That move came sooner than expected. At a glossy law office downtown, Martin sat across from Vincent Kerr, Julia's attorney. Vincent smirked as he slid a thick packet across the table. "Sign these, Mr. Graves," he said smoothly. "Julia will retain full custody of the children, the house, and a majority of your business profits. If you fight this, we'll crush you in court." Martin picked up the papers, scanned them briefly, and set them down without a flicker of emotion. Vincent Kerr leaned back in his leather chair, clearly waiting for Martin to explode. Most men did at this point. They shouted, cursed, begged. But Martin simply reached into his portfolio and pulled out a plain white envelope. He slid it across the polished table with the precision of a soldier laying down a loaded weapon. "Deliver this to your client," he said calmly. Vincent frowned. "What is it?" Martin's eyes locked on his. "Read it, and you'll understand." That night, Julia called him 3 times. Martin let the first 2 ring out, his face unreadable. The 3rd time, he answered. "Martin, what do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "You're threatening my family." Martin's voice was cold. "No, Julia, I'm protecting mine. You want a war? You've got one. And I don't lose wars." For a moment, silence lingered between them. Then Julia spat. "You'll regret this." Martin hung up without another word. The next call came from Margaret Harrison herself. The judge's voice, usually sharp and commanding, carried a trace of unease. "Martin, let's not be hasty. You think you can frighten me with old files?" Martin's reply was clipped. "They're not accusations, Judge. They're records, sealed documents, photos, transfers. You buried a family's death. and now I've unburied it. Margaret inhaled slowly. What do you want? 3 things, Martin said flatly. Custody of my children, full control of my company, and your resignation before investigators come knocking. Margaret tried to sound bold. You're bluffing. Martin's tone didn't waver. You know I'm not. Then he ended the call, leaving her in silence. That night, Martin sent anonymous tips to 3 investigative journalists, each with just enough detail to raise questions. He also sent redacted files to a federal contact. He didn't need to fire the gun. Just cocking it was enough. By the next afternoon, the Harrison family was in chaos. Adrian called Martin, his voice cracking with fury. You're destroying everything, Martin, he shouted into the voicemail. An hour later, he called again, his voice softer, almost desperate. Let's meet. We can work something out. Martin didn't answer either call. Julia arrived at Martin's office unannounced. Her usually perfect appearance was frayed, her hair loose, her designer jacket wrinkled. She slammed the door behind her. You're ruining us, she snapped. Do you even care what this will do to Ethan and Grace? Martin stood slowly, his expression steady. I care about them more than anyone in your family ever has. That's why I'm doing this. Julia's lips trembled, but no words came. By evening, rumors were spreading online. News outlets hinted at corruption surrounding a respected judge. Forums speculated about the Harrisons. For the first time in her career, Margaret skipped a court session. Julia's world, once polished and controlled, was unraveling thread by thread. The final confrontation came back at Vincent Kerr's office. The tension was thick as Martin sat at one end of the table, calm as ever, while Julia sat at the other, her hand trembling around a pen. Vincent, usually smug, looked pale. Are we doing this or not? Martin asked. Julia glared at him, but the fight had left her eyes. With shaky hands, she signed away custody, the business transfer, and the property settlement. When she finished, Julia shoved the papers across the table. You win, she said bitterly. Martin didn't touch them immediately. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. No, Julia, this isn't about winning. This is about truth. So before we end this, you're going to say it. Why did you do this? Julia pressed her lips tightly, refusing to speak. Vincent shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing danger in the silence. Finally, Julia snapped. She threw the pen on the table, her voice sharp and trembling. You want the truth? Fine. You were never good enough for me. I married you because you were useful, money, connections, a respectable name. But you were just a soldier pretending to be more. I outgrew you years ago. Martin sat back, nodding slowly. And yet I just took everything you valued. Julia's face flushed red, her chest rising and falling fast, but she said nothing. Martin gathered the signed documents and slipped them into his leather folder. But before leaving, he pulled out another envelope and slid it across the table. Julia frowned. What is this now? She asked, her voice low, wary. Martin leaned back, his tone calm. Consider it a parting gift. With trembling fingers, Julia opened it. The color drained from her face. Inside were photographs. Adrian boarding a private jet with a woman half his age, their hands intertwined. Another showed him withdrawing large sums of cash from an offshore account, an account registered in both his and Julia's names. The final image was Adrian reclining on a yacht, glass of whiskey in hand, with the same young woman curled beside him. Julia's lips parted, but no words came. Martin's voice cut the silence. You thought he was your partner in all this? He's been playing you, Julia, the same way you tried to play me. Julia's hand shook as she set the photos down. Her eyes darted toward Vincent, but the lawyer looked away. You're lying, she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. Martin shook his head. No lies, just receipts. Julia's composure cracked. He said he promised. Her words broke into a sob. He told me we'd start fresh. Martin leaned forward, his eyes cold. Fresh. Julia, he never wanted a life with you. He wanted access. To me. To my company. To everything I built. And you gave it to him on a silver platter. She slammed her hands against the table. Stop it, she cried, but the pain in her voice betrayed the truth. Vincent finally spoke, his voice hesitant. Julia, this changes things. If those accounts are tied to your name, investigators will have questions. Julia's head snapped toward him. "Shut up," she barked. But the panic in her tone filled the room. For the first time, she wasn't the one holding control. Martin stood slowly, gathering his folder. "It's over," he said simply, and turned for the door. 2 nights later, Adrian showed up at Martin's office uninvited. His hair was messy, his suit wrinkled. He reeked of whiskey. "Martin," he slurred, slamming his hands on the desk. "You think you've won? You think you could just ruin me?" Martin stayed seated, calm as ever. "Adrian, you ruined yourself. All I did was show the world what you already are." Adrian's eyes burned. "I loved her, you know." Martin tilted his head. "No, you loved what she could give you, just like she loved what she thought I could give her." Adrian lunged across the desk, but Martin moved swiftly, pinning him with one arm. The soldier in him had never dulled. "Don't make me finish what I should have years ago," Martin said coldly, pushing him back. Adrian staggered, panting, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he spat. Martin's voice was steady. "For you, Adrian, it already is." News broke within a week. Investigators opened a formal inquiry into Judge Margaret Harrison's past cases. Headlines screamed corruption. Gregory Harrison's financial dealings were pulled apart, exposing shady campaign donations. Julia's name appeared in whispers, linked to Adrian's offshore accounts. The Harrison empire, once untouchable, crumbled under the weight of its own secrets. In the middle of the storm, Martin focused only on Ethan and Grace. He drove them to school, cooked dinner, sat with them during homework. At bedtime, Grace asked, "Daddy, are you sad?" Martin smiled softly, brushing her hair back. "Sometimes, sweetheart, but when I have you and your brother, I have everything I need." Ethan looked up from his book. "Will Mom come back?" Martin hesitated. "She'll always be your mom. But right now, she has to fix mistakes she made." One evening, as Martin tucked them in, Julia called again. He let it ring, staring at the screen. Then, against his better judgment, he answered. Her voice was quiet, broken. "Martin, I've lost everything. Adrian's gone. My parents won't speak to me. I don't know what to do." Martin's face was unreadable. "You should have thought of that before you tried to erase me." Julia sobbed. "I'm sorry." Martin exhaled, his voice steady. "Sorry doesn't undo betrayal. Goodbye, Julia." Then he ended the call. Julia didn't stop calling. Every night, her number flashed across Martin's screen. Some nights she begged, other nights she screamed, blaming him for the downfall of her family. One night she whispered, "I still love you, Martin." He closed his eyes, exhausted. "No, Julia," he said quietly, "you love power, and now that it's gone, you're just lonely." Her sob echoed through the phone before he hung up. Adrian disappeared from the city. Rumors swirled about him fleeing to the Cayman Islands, but Martin didn't care. He was done chasing ghosts. What mattered now was Ethan and Grace. One Saturday morning, he took them to the park. Grace skipped ahead, laughing, while Ethan kicked a soccer ball. A mother nearby smiled at Martin. "They adore you," she said. He returned the smile faintly. Then my whole world. Back at the Harrison estate, chaos reigned. Reporters camped outside the gates, shouting questions. Margaret resigned from the bench in disgrace, issuing a statement filled with empty words. Gregory tried to fight back, but his reputation collapsed under financial scandal. Julia, once the darling of real estate galas, couldn't step into a restaurant without whispers. Her friends abandoned her, and her empire dried up overnight. One afternoon, Julia showed up at Martin's door. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen. She stood there, clutching her designer purse like a lifeline. "Please," she said softly, "let me see the children." Martin stepped outside, blocking the doorway. "Not today." Julia's eyes filled. "Martin, I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed you, but they're still my kids." He studied her for a long moment. "You used them as pawns in your game. If you want to see them, you'll do it on my terms. Supervised. No lies. No schemes." Julia's lips trembled. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll do whatever you say." Martin nodded. "Good. Because this time, Julia, the rules aren't yours to make." He closed the door gently, leaving her on the porch, tears slipping down her cheeks. For the first time in years, Julia realized she no longer held control. Adrian's betrayal weighed on her, too. Late at night, she scrolled through old photos of him, trying to convince herself he cared. But the images Martin had given her, the yacht, the cash withdrawals, the other woman, haunted her. He played me, she whispered into the empty apartment. He played me worse than I played Martin. Meanwhile, Martin found peace in the ordinary. He cooked simple meals with Ethan, laughed with Grace as they painted messy pictures, and repaired an old motorcycle in the garage. Neighbors who once saw him as Julia's husband now greeted him warmly, recognizing his quiet strength. "You're doing a good job with them," one neighbor said. Martin simply nodded. "I'm trying." Months passed, and the Harrison name became synonymous with scandal. Headlines read, "Disgraced judge under federal probe," and "Developer queen loses empire." Martin never gloated. He kept his head down, focusing on work and family. But every time he saw another headline, he felt justice had found its way. One evening, Ethan asked, "Dad, why don't we see Mom anymore?" Martin sighed, pulling his son close. "Sometimes people make choices that hurt others. Your mom made those choices, but she still loves you, and that won't ever change." Ethan frowned. "Do you still love her?" Martin's voice was soft. "I loved who I thought she was. But people aren't always who they pretend to be.